So we get down to where their control post was, and there was a big, tall Jap there. He was about 6'3" or so, biggest one ever, and he could talk English. So he made us empty all our pockets out, laid everything down, and at one time I had a plate that I'd taken off the dashboard of one of those planes we knocked down, and I had it in my billfold, but I couldn't find that damn thing, and I couldn't come up with it, and I thought, I better not. But before that, I had I'd been playing poker there in Bataan, and I'd won quite a bit of money, and I put a bunch of it in my sock, in my shoe, see? And they took what I had in my billfold when I laid it out on the deal, but they didn't go through. I felt about this high. It was a damnedest feeling to give, in other words, sort of a give up feeling, just figuring, gee, what's going to happen to us, and we just didn't know. It was just a cloudy outlook for the future. We didn't know what the hell to expect, and so when we was out, like I say, in the hills 4 days after Bataan surrendered, and we hadn't had no food except they issued us 3 cans of rations, dry rations, the night we took off from the camp there, and that's all we had that next day. So there was 3 or 4 days went by we hadn't had nothing. So the Japs, we told them we hadn't had nothing to eat, and so we did have our canteens, and we had water in the canteens at that point. So they sent us on down to the highway, and we climbed out on a hill, and what there was, it looked like a tennis court affair was up there, and so they herded us all into here, and then what come by was a Jap officer with the newsreels and all, and taking pictures of us and whatnot. And so he asked, he said he could talk English. He asked if we'd had anything to eat. We said no. So he said, well, let's see. In the back of his command car, he had a little sack of oyster crackers and 1 little can of sardines. So he opened that up, and there's about 150 of us there or so, and we each got 1 cracker and 1 little sliver of sardine, and that's what we had there. That's what he gave us. That afternoon, then, we started on the death march, and we realized, you know, how serious it was getting. I was lucky in one respect that the medic we had with us broke down with malaria, 104-degree fever, and he wanted to know if anybody would carry his little medicine pouch for him and his canteen. I said, sure, I will. So I strapped his canteen on and the medicine pack on my back, and I was carrying it. We saw a truck go by, and damn, he's on this truck, laying down there, just looked like he's passed out or something, this medic. And here I had his equipment. I said, well, that's good for me. So he took on off, and that night they they marched us into cabin airfield and stopped us there for the night and the rest. And there was 2 Japs with 2 machine guns on a little knoll there, and they kept training back and forth, and they'd try to get us up together, and we was just sitting with our knees up against one another, and I thought, boy, they're going to slaughter us right here. And I told the guy next to me, I said, well, if the shooting starts, to our left there's some big bomb craters, and just a little ways, maybe 50 feet past them, the jungle started. So I said, well, when the shooting starts, let's break for these bomb craters and get in them, and there's 3 or 4 of them out in there, and get out of here and get into the jungle. Well, it never did. I guess they were just training to see if they could cover us all. So about dark then, one Jap come around and wanted to know if we had canteens. He wanted to fill the water. Sure. So I sent both of the ones I had, and directly come back filled with water, and that's the only water we got from the Japs for that whole death march, was about 5 or 6 days. Well, they herded us into a enclosure of about a 10-acre enclosure, fenced off, and they had a whole bunch of guys there. In fact, there was 1,600 of us there at that spot. And this was like the second night we was with them, and they put us there, and we stayed there about 4 days with no food. The next day after we was there was a truck come up and had a medic on the back of it, and we asked this medic, said, hey, what in the hell are they going to feed us? He said, I don't know, I've been with them 5 days, they haven't fed me yet. And right then I began to think, boy, this is going to be a rough son of a gun.
And I couldn't hardly breathe. But there's one of the German guards brought one of those old web belts, and I wrapped it around my chest and fixed it where it wouldn't hurt so bad and breathe. But the next day after that, they had called an old man in there. There's an old German, and he was assigned to take me to the prison camp. And when I jumped out of the airplane, all I had on was my electric house shoes, you might say. Didn't have any soles on them, just a lot of electric wire in there. So they gave me a pair of wooden sole shoes. And this old German was assigned to take me to the prison camp, which is about 4.5 miles away.
What was the name of the prison camp?
I don't think it even had a name, because I didn't stay there but just one night. It was just kind of a holding pen, what it was. It's about a half acre of surrounded by barbed wire, and it had one little old shack in there, and there's about 25 or 30 people there, and we slept on some hay inside that shack.
The Germans flew us the next morning on the 27th of November to Italy, and we landed.
This is what, 1942?
42, yes, 42. And we landed in Sicily, and then we flew us on into Naples, and that's where they turned us over to the Italian government to be held as prisoners. And they put us in this Camp 66 right out of Naples. And that's where we run into these British soldiers that had been down fighting down in the desert at Benghazi. And those men were starved to death. They were nothing but skin and bone. And the camp was filthy. We stayed there about a week or 10 days. And then they've put us on a train and taken us up to Savigliano. And that's where we spent the 9 months, 15 days in prison there.
Sitting there talking, and I had a candy bar which I shared with some of those guys there, and they were talking. I said, well, maybe they're going to make a spearhead with us and go to the front. Well, that didn't happen, but they did march us north a little ways, and they put us up inside the mountain there. Next day, we spent up in the mountain there. They took us on that night and marched us back, and to a little village up in the hills back in there in the mountains, and we slept there, and they fed us, and it was rice, cooked rice, and I tasted it. It didn't taste too good, I wasn't used to that rice being cooked that way, and some of the other GIs said, you better eat. No. They got some rice balls, got it in some paper, and they put it in the pocket. There were guys that had probably Second World War guys. Next morning they were separating the Americans from the South Koreans, and the South Koreans to one side, the Americans to the other. And this North Korean officer, he came up to me and asked me if I was a Korean. I must have looked like a Korean, but otherwise he wouldn't have asked me that. And real proudly I told him, no, I said, I'm an American. In the language there, I could talk it pretty good. So we got separated, and about 4 months later, I met one of the South Koreans that was captured with me. I met him at camp number 8, close to Pyongyang, and I asked him what happened when we were separated. And they said they sent him back to the American lines, because they didn't have enough to feed everybody that they just wanted the Americans.
They had already found Ken Higdon, and when I was returned to that village where I believe they had already taken Ken, in that we were confined to the same cell, and then the next morning or the next afternoon we were taken together in the same vehicle to Hanoi. But one of the things that surprised me was that when I arrived at the village under close guard of the militiamen, there were thousands of, well, probably hundreds of villagers filling the streets that we were going to have to walk through. And the militiamen formed a human wedge and began to march our group very quickly into this crowd.
Just the two of you?
Oh no, there were probably by this time about 6 militiamen. One took up the point, 2 were ahead of us, and then they had about 3 of them, 2 on either side and 1 behind me. So it was a human wedge of about 6 militiamen with me in the center, and we just forced our way through that crowd. I was offered a cup of tea, which I accepted, and they asked for, what is your target, was the type of aircraft, and all that. And I gave them name, rank, serial number, and they began to realize that they weren't going to gain very much more than that, so they threw me in a concrete cell that did not have, it was just a concrete cell, anything in it. My flight suit was wet from being in the rice paddy. It was a relatively cool evening, so after I'd been in this cell for even a few minutes after the physical activity, as long as I was walking, etc., I didn't realize it was going to be so chilly. But with that wet flight suit and the inactivity of being in that cell, trying to get some sleep, because I knew that sleep deprivation was going to be one of the techniques. So I tried to get as much rest as possible to be ready to cope with that prospect, but I found I couldn't sleep at all. And so when one of the guards looked into the cell, I intentionally shivered in order to try to communicate the fact that I was cold. And I was very surprised that they gave me a blanket.
Oh, okay.
Very surprised. And I tried to get as much rest as I could. They had a person in a regular Army uniform, North Vietnamese Army uniform, with an interrogation. And he was sitting behind a low table. I was brought in and told to stand at attention, and he, in very limited capability of English, tried to conduct the first field interrogation. And that lasted, as I recall, about maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I was able at that point to not share very much information at all. It was very easy to avoid that level of interrogation. I also was able to establish what time it was, because he had a wristwatch on, and the wristwatch was faced outward. He would fold his hands on the desk in front of him, and I saw that it was like 8:15 in the morning. It was the sun was shining that morning. The overcast was not at this village any longer, and I was able at that point in time, by knowing the shadow line and the time, I was able to develop a improvised sundial. From that point on, I could tell what time it was, even though I didn't have a watch.
Well, from then on, immediately afterwards, the Iraqi soldiers gathered around me, and they began to take all my equipment. They took my 9mm pistol, they took my wallet, they took my Wrigley's chewing gum, which I remember them passing out. And then what happened to me, I was placed on a motorcycle. There was an Iraqi soldier driving the motorcycle. I got on behind him, and then the soldier that captured me got on behind me. So the 3 of us, if you can picture it, were on this motorcycle going through the desert. And then I was taken to